Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us this evening. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and the Mayor of Prince Rupert to discuss his city's infrastructure challenges. I know you're aware of the specific challenge that city faces, namely the age and condition of their drinking water infrastructure, especially their water mains, and the fact that last Christmas they had to declare a state of local emergency due to several water main breaks, and in fact officials fear the catastrophic failure of the entire system if something isn't done as soon as possible. The province has come in with an investment of $65 million to help fix the problem, and the city has applied to the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund for a similar size contribution from your government. I know that ministers don't typically make funding announcements at committee meetings, but I wonder if you could share with the committee and with me your government's posture on the project, how you understand the problem and what's at stake in Prince Rupert.
Thank you for the question and for arranging the meeting with Mayor Pond as well. I very much enjoyed the conversation, and as I shared with you earlier today, I had the chance to actually speak to him again since, as well as my provincial counterpart in British Columbia about this project and other infrastructure priorities. This is a great example of how what seemingly looks like a small project on paper can have an immense economic impact. So Prince Rupert, I'm sure everyone around the table knows, is home to a major port that the entire Canadian economy depends upon. To the extent that we have a disaster in the water treatment, water or wastewater systems in Prince Rupert, it's not just the residents, it's also the residents, which is important in its own right, but it's the entire supply chain across the Canadian economy that could be impacted if people can't live in the community who work at the port. The Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund was designed with projects like this in mind, where if something is to go wrong, we want to protect against the economic consequences that would follow a disaster of the kind that you've explained. So I won't create a new pattern of ministerial announcements in the middle of a process that's playing out. But my sense is that the fund was designed with projects like this in mind, and I hope to work towards a solution with you as the local MP, as well as Mayor Pond and the provincial government, because I believe something of national importance, such as the Canadian supply chain, demands the attention of all levels of government.
Fantastic. Thank you, Minister. Moving on to some other issues that face communities in the riding I represent. We've had Environment Canada and Fisheries and Oceans Canada express concern about communities' wastewater effluent, which is discharged either into the ocean or into rivers, and meeting various federal regulations. Of course, with climate change, this becomes even more of an issue because we're seeing lower flows in our rivers during drought periods. The community of Smithers, where I live, applied for a wastewater infrastructure project in 2020. They were denied. They went back to the drawing board, revised their proposal, reapplied in February of 2022, so over a year and a half ago. And they still haven't heard back with a response on their application. Meanwhile, they're struggling to meet the federal regulations when it comes to discharging effluent into a wild salmon river, home to a world-renowned steelhead fishery. This is a really treasured waterway, and of course they want to upgrade their infrastructure and do what's right to maintain the environment and treat the sewage properly. The village of Port Clements has a similar situation with their wastewater project, and this is a community of about between 300 and 400 people. And what they've seen over the years is that the construction cost escalations, while they wait for approval of their grant applications, has skyrocketed. So a project that in 2021 cost $2.5 million is now estimated to cost $4.5 million. So they're struggling to, and I believe in the case of Port Clements, they've been granted a portion of the project. But the problem we're seeing here is that communities are applying to do these projects, and the timeline for getting them done and the construction cost escalations is making it very difficult. I wonder how your government sees that problem and what it's doing to correct it.
So you raised two distinct issues, and I'll quickly try to address both. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair, so I can...
There's 1 minute and 10 seconds, Minister.
I will try to deal with them both swiftly. So I was involved when I was a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of the Environment on some of the wastewater effluent regulations. And this is actually a big deal on the West Coast because it's not just the steelhead salmon population that you're referring to. If you actually go down up the food chain, so to speak, when pollutants get stored in the salmon that orca eat, when they start to run out of food and draw on their fat supply, can actually have a damaging impact on the health of vulnerable orca populations as well. We need to deal with wastewater effluent challenges in every region of the country. We are trying to marry the advancement of a new regulatory framework with investments in water and wastewater that we have done at a level not seen in a very long time through the ICIP. I expect that's where people have applied to from your question. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. The way that process works is a bit challenging for me to speak to the process because typically we have the provincial government, who's a signatory to the bilateral agreement, take the applications and then send prioritized projects to the federal government, which, so long as they're eligible, we tend to fund. Happy to take this offline in the few seconds I have remaining because I don't think we're going to solve it during this exchange, and we can follow up on the cost escalation issue if we have more time because I'm sure I'm out.
I'd love to fit in 2 questions in my 2.5 minutes, so I'll go as quickly as I can. The first is I'd love your thoughts on how your government plans to address this issue of construction cost escalations for projects that see a long time period between application and award.
Very quickly, the way that we typically do our funding envelopes is that we can sometimes be flexible on a project-by-project basis with the proponent, but we typically have a ceiling given the spending authorities that Parliament gives us. So to the extent that a jurisdiction would request specific changes to a project that we make a funding award to, it would eat away at the ability for them to fund other projects. We don't have the ability without Parliament authorizing additional spending to simply say yes to every project that has experienced cost increases, which is happening across Canada right now. There are some projects that we are working through to try to make adjustments where possible, but it does have an impact given that there's not an increase to the ceiling of the fund.
Okay, thank you. The City of Terrace has applied to the Housing Accelerator Fund to enable the construction of 180 units of housing. On the national scale, that might not seem like a huge number, but for a community of 12,000 people, that's a significant impact on the housing issue in that community. Now, at a population of 12,000, they fall just over the threshold between the small rural community stream and the large urban community stream. So that puts them in the same funding stream as the City of Vancouver, the City of Winnipeg, the City of Toronto. They're concerned that smaller communities in that larger stream are going to get left out. And I'm wondering what approach your government is going to take to ensure equity between different sizes of communities within that very large range of community sizes.
This question is everything to me. As a local MP, I live in a community that has just shy of 10,000 people. I represent other communities that have just more than 10,000 people, depending on how you define community. I want to personally engage to the extent that I can to find the best applications that are going to build the most homes for the and provide the greatest value for money. Communities that have just over the threshold that puts them in a new category will still be eligible and will be given full consideration. There are some very large cities that have been identified as growth leaders that we are going to be addressing first. Some of them have been announced already, but those who are not amongst growth leaders who've been experiencing significant population gains in recent years, but still have a population large enough that they fall into the stream you've mentioned, will absolutely be eligible and will be given fair consideration. And my constituents would not forgive me if the other